So in today's reading from the Book of Kings, we've heard about the prophet of Elijah throughout this week, a fascinating character and his standoff with the priests of Baal and how all that ended up, and just the miraculous lighting of that fire. So when the two altars were built, one to Baal and the sacrifice put on that altar, one to Yahweh and the sacrifice put on that altar, they douse the altar built to Yahweh with water, and yet they prayed then, and the standoff was to see which fire would God light. So which God was actually real. Is Baal real or is God real? And of course, the fire falls from heaven and the altar built in honor of Yahweh is lit, and the offering consumed, showing then that even though the king of Israel had apostatized and was now following Baal, even though all the prophets who followed Yahweh had now been killed, and the only one left was Elijah, it showed that he was right. It showed that he was in the right, that the Yahweh, the God that he follows, is actually the real, only true God. And it was such a risky situation. This could easily have cost Elijah his life, easily. Because if he had been wrong, if God hadn't intervened in that moment, if that altar hadn't been lit miraculously by God, Elijah would have been killed. Absolutely. He was outnumbered 450 to 1 and had the king against him as well. He didn't stand a chance. So God was on his side. And if God is with me, who can be against me? Okay, so after this, anyway, we heard about Elijah's experience of contemplative prayer. So the Lord passes by the mouth of the cave where Elijah was, but he wasn't in the earthquake, he wasn't in the great wind, he wasn't in the fire, but he's in the gentle breeze. So Elijah learning the power of interiority, the power of contemplative prayer. And then as we contemplate the Lord, as we spend time with him, as he is enough for us in here, he transforms us. So contemplation leading to transformation. And now near the end of his ministry, the Lord has called him to pass on the mantle, so to speak, to get a trainee, a kind of an apprentice, if you will. So God inspires Elijah to go to Elisha and train Elisha in the ways of being a prophet. So Elijah turns up and speaks to Elisha. Elisha is plowing, so a hardy man, used to hard work, used to difficulty, used to failure. I mean, used to fixing things. You know, if you've ever been a farmer, and things are constantly breaking, you're constantly fixing and breaking and fixing and breaking, and that's just daily life. So Elisha is a plowman. Okay. Now Elijah calls him, and he says, "Let me go and say goodbye to my parents first." And he does. Now the next bit is important. When Elisha decides to follow Elijah, what does he do? He takes 2 of his oxen and he slaughters them. And he uses his plow as a great big serving tray. So he cooks the oxen on his plow, right? Now, again, you might think, why is that? Why is that important, or why is that even in the Bible? If you keep in mind, even if you can remember Ireland of not that long ago, 60, 70 years ago, I remember we at home, we had one plow, and it was my dad's pride and joy. And he would sometimes give it on loan to a friend of his. And then another friend had the mower for cutting the fields, and we would sometimes borrow that. And another friend had a hay turner, and we'd kind of share them. But my goodness, if you got someone else's equipment, you'd take such great care of it. You'd grease everything up beforehand, you'd clean everything down afterwards, you'd give it back almost better than you got it. Why? So that you could get it next year as well, in part, you know? But point was, though, resources were limited. So we had to make do with what we had and take care of what we had. Elisha just killed 2 of his oxen and burnt his plow. What does that mean? It means his safety net is gone. If this whole thing doesn't work out with Elijah, he has nothing to go back to, or at least it's going to be very hard now to get another pay for another plow. How will he do it? You're giving away your safety net. You're taking a risk. Elisha now is stepping out and saying, my old life, I leave it behind me. It's like Jesus when he calls the rich young man. when the rich young man rather comes to Jesus and says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, obey the commandments. And he lists them. And the young man says, well, I've obeyed all of these since my youth. You lack one thing. Go and sell what you own, give it to the poor, and then come follow me. The man goes away, sad, because he was a man of great wealth. So, Lord, I want to follow you. But in case it doesn't work out, I want a plan B. I want a kind of a getaway option, just in case. I want something to fall back on. And that sounds maybe logical, or it sounds reasonable. But if the Lord calls us, he also wants us to trust him. He wants us to trust that you won't need a plan B. Similarly in marriage, by the way. I marry you, and I spend my life with you. But if things don't work out, there's always Bridie. Do you know what I mean? You can't do that. You can't marry someone else. But sure, look, I mean, I really am. I'm dedicated to you. If it doesn't work out, I have this little bit on the side, and sure, look, we'll see how it goes. You can't do that. Do you know what I mean? If you're going to give your heart to God, you give your heart to God, and there is no plan B. There is no plan B. So when the Lord asks us to follow him, especially as priests and religious, like he doesn't want us to have a plan B because he doesn't want us to need a plan B. We don't need a plan B. Do we trust that the Lord is our everything? Do we trust that he will provide everything? Someone just sent me a quote yesterday which I really liked. It says, under the care of God's mighty hand, we release the need to know when and why and how. I'll say that again. Under the care of God's mighty hand, we release the need to know when and why and how. What's that saying? If I trust the Lord, then when things don't go the way I planned, I don't need to know why. The Lord doesn't have to explain himself to me. He may, if he wishes, but he doesn't have to. He's God, I'm not. I don't command him. He isn't there to serve my needs. I'm there to serve him. It's just very often I think we can slip into this idea that God is basically there to serve my needs. What I need, what I want, my intentions, my future, all of those kind of things. I entrust them to God, but in a way that, Lord, I want you to do what I want. And if he doesn't, then I'm kind of done with you. I'm done with this prayer thing. I'm done with this mass thing. It doesn't work anyway. Nothing changes. But hang on. Who's God in this situation here? Who's commanding who? Who's following who? We're servants, remember. We're children of God. We're not God's parent. We don't tell him what to do. We ask. We can ask. We should ask. The Lord tells us, if there's anything you want, ask for it in my name and it'll be granted to you. So he does want us to ask, but we ask as your children here ask. If your children were to say, Mommy and Daddy, if you don't give me, what's the newest PlayStation? PlayStation 2, 4, what are we up to? An iPhone 10 to 15, what are they up to? 10? No, they're going past 10. 10 was a couple of years ago. Mommy, if you don't give me an iPhone 15 or whatever they are now, you don't love me. And I'm done with you. Would you be happy to have your child speak to you like that? And not just because it's cheeky, but like, what do you think I am? I mean, do you not trust me that if I say you don't need an iPhone 15, that I have your best interest at heart, that maybe I know what I'm talking about? Trust me. And Mommy, if you don't give me an iPhone 15, I'm going to ask Daddy. And if Daddy doesn't give it to me, I'm going to ask Uncle Father Patrick, because he's irresponsible. And he'll just give it to me. Do you know what I mean? If there's always kind of, they're asking you, but there's always a kind of a plan B, it shows a real lack of trust in you as a parent. Do we do something similar with God? I think we might do it more often than we believe. Lord, you're there to serve me, and if you don't, I'm done. I'll go somewhere else. I'll go to Buddha. We'll see how that works. And that's what we find in our world today. I want the Lord to serve me. I'm not his servant. And that's why things are all upside down. It's why our prayer lives are all so messed up, if we have any prayer life at all. Elisha slaughters his oxen, feeds his men, burns his plough. Plan B is gone. Which means, Lord, you are my everything. There is no other way. I give everything to you. I leave everything behind. I trust you. And under God's mighty hand, we release the need to know when and why and how. And this is lived faith, where I understand who God is. I understand his heart for me. I understand that he loves me. I understand that he knows me. And so we try to make that act of trust today. We're taking a vote of Mass to Our Lady today, so we're asking her also for her prayers and her intercession, that we can grow in trust, that when I don't get it, or I don't like it, or I outright just disagree with what the Lord is doing, that I will trust him anyway. And that I can release from my strangled grip the need to know why and when and how. And that I can simply trust God to provide. Amen.